feels like a test that I fail, so depressed when I can't seem to get out. But something deep inside won't let me.
I do try to stay positive, but I also stay real. And this is fucking real right now. Hi, welcome to me. And I think this is my first story time of what it was like growing up as a Mormon. I'm pre-recording some content right now, stockpiling for whenever I start my new job. As of filming this, just 2 days ago was when the haircutting video went up. And before then, I was having people asking me to make this video, and anytime I brought it up, people were like, yes, please make it. So I'm going to be kind of just talking off the cuff, because it was about almost a month ago that I'd actually journaled about it, and I just reread all the entries. So it's not scripted at all, but I may pull up the journal and just to kind of re-spark my memory, because I journaled 6 or 8 pages on this topic of just some of the highlights. And so I'm going to just jump into it. My parents converted as Mormons before I was born. So my parents were not born into the church. I believe they may have met through church functions, or around the time that they joined the church was when they met. I don't know. They've explained that to me before in the past. That part's a little rocky. I just know that we were all sealed in the temple when I was an infant. I believe it was before my mom was pregnant with my brother. My sister is 4 years older than me. My sister has 3 kids that y'all are probably never going to see, because I don't really be putting kids on the internet like that. No. So, that's just kind of my stance on that. And my sister lives out of state. And, so that's my family. I have an older sister, a younger brother. My brother is 2 years younger than me. And we grew up in the Mormon church. Before my teen years, I don't really have much negative association with being in the church. I was a kid. I went to my Sunday school classes. I believed what I was told. I believed in the teachings that I was taught. I don't have a lot of memory of negative experiences. I made a friend when I was a lot younger. She was a few years younger than me. I met her when I was 8, and then because I remember one day she vanished for a long time, and eventually when I got a lot older, that's when I learned about foster care and what happened with her. And we met through the church, and I was friends with her and a group of other people, and pretty much almost all of us ended up leaving the religion. In fact, I remember so specifically, there was this girl, she was a Utah Mormon, moved in with her family at a church function. We were all sitting at a table, and she walked up, well, isn't it, and I think what she said was well, isn't this the Mormon Misfits, or some shit like that. It was weird, it was mean, it was petty, but that was a kind of shit I dealt with growing up. School was far worse than church, but that was at a church event specifically. Growing up, I really wasn't socialized outside of the church. My mom, and I think this has a lot to do with stuff that happened when I was very young, but my mom was just very, I feel, overprotective, and with both of my parents working a lot, it just took a lot for them to agree to let me to go do things, even if I could figure out a ride, unless it was a school approved function or a church function. Other than that, I was home and I was watching TV, honest, or reading books. That was kind of my childhood in that sense. I also didn't watch a lot of secular movies outside of Disney and Pixar. I say this as an example because it's the easiest one that I can remember, but I didn't see The Matrix until I was 28, and that was because my ex was you have to sit down and watch this. He did that with me for a lot of movies. I think one was Donnie Darko was one. The Fifth Element was another. I used to have a game when in my 20s. I'd be name a movie, and I can probably guarantee you I haven't seen it. And they would just listen to it, yep, no, not. Because it was just something that, it was just very rare. There was a few anomalies. I watched Dirty Dancing on TV growing up a good bit. I think one time I found it on a channel that wasn't the censored TV version. But other than that, I did see Titanic, for example. And so there was like a few anomalies that happened, but for the most part, very sheltered in that way. My mom doesn't like it when I describe it that way, I feel like, but it's just true. Like, especially comparatively to my peers, I was very sheltered. The negative aspects of me and Mormonism didn't really start until I was 15. Some of these stories I've definitely told in the past, so I'm sorry if some of these are a little redundant, but I'll try to kind of give them better frame of mind, or a better frame of reference, I should say. The first memory where, like, the glass shattered and this is the story I've told the most often, was me sitting in social studies class talking with a peer. I don't remember his name, but I remember his face. I remember, like, if I saw his pictures, I could probably realize who he is. But he and I were in a debate, and I was on the wrong side of history, and I was spouting everything that I had ever been known, I had been told to believe my whole life, about the topic of gay marriage. And he's getting more and more frustrated with me because I'm talking like an idiot. And finally, he just gets really exasperated with me, and he goes, well, you know what? I just can't understand what's so wrong about two people loving each other. And I froze, like, so everyone, like, people were talking in the classroom, like, just having separate conversations, and this was a conversation he and I was having, and just, I remember the room going quiet, not because people stopped talking, but because, like, my brain just, like, I don't know, but everything went really quiet, and I had, like, one really small but big thought, like, very quiet but big, and I was just like, I don't know either. I don't know. I didn't fully digest that in the moment, but what I came to realize was that was not my thought. Those are not my beliefs. It was what I was expected to believe. What I was told to believe. And in the moment, because I am who I am, I spouted something back. I spit something back to kind of just be like, well, yeah, but whatever. And the interaction ends naturally, and I was never the same. I was also a closeted queer kid. I was bi and didn't know it, didn't understand it. I remember, like, I used to look up inappropriate content for my age of an inappropriate nature, and because I was so curious about it and trying to understand my emotions, and I was, like, fully convincing myself that I was straight, but, my behavior wasn't aligning with that. And so at some point in this time frame, I remember the day my dad came up to my room and knocked on my door, because my dad had TeamViewer growing up. And I'm going to embarrass myself for a second, because there's a side story here where one time I was on my computer and I was looking something up of that nature, and my dad's name popped up in the corner to show he was watching my computer, and I freaked out. And I believe at this point, I hadn't actually searched anything, but he just saw the website I was on. So I unplugged my computer from the wall, and I, like, barrel into bed. And he comes up and he talks to me, and honestly, it was so embarrassing. I don't remember it. My memory, like, blocked that part out. But it was at some point after that, I'm assuming he probably, like, saw things that I missed in the history, or caught me doing things that I thought I was slick enough to get away with. And he handed me a business card with no conversation. And I hadn't said anything. I hadn't come out in any way. I didn't end up coming out till I was 27, by the way. Like, fully. But he hands it to me, and it was a conversion therapy card for a conversion therapist. And I'm not going to sit here and say that that's where he currently stands or what he currently believes. I actually don't know, but I don't think so. I don't think my parents are in that space anymore when it comes to the topic of, like, gay people. But I remember being mortified and doubling down on, like, what is this even for? Like, I don't need this, da-da-da-da. And it just made me shut down harder. And, like, I was going through a lot at this point. I was just very lost and confused and questioning the church and questioning everything I had ever known, everything I had ever believed was founded upon Mormonism. It, you know, for better or for worse, like some of the worst beliefs being, I truly believed that there was something wrong with me, that I was inherently evil in some way because of the trauma I endured as a child. That took a lot of therapy to undo. I did get over that by my early 20s though, thank God. But I at one point believed that there were people that God loved more than others because I didn't understand how my life experience had happened any other way. And so when I was questioning the church, I was like, I don't think I ever read the Book of Mormon or Bible like from cover to cover. But I read a lot of it. I would read portions of it. I would like try to understand it. I would ask questions, and I would try to understand like what was actually wrong about gay marriage. Like that was my like sticking point. Because what's wrong with love? And none of the answers were good enough. None of it made sense. All of it seemed like overinterpretation. None of it had any logical backing in a framework that's supposed to be about loving thy neighbor. And I was just getting more increasingly angry. And so, like, I remember at one point, like, throughout this process, I was sitting in my room alone, and I had a journal open in front of me, and I had gotten through, like, journaling and writing out cuss words and stuff, and I, for the first time, said a cuss word out loud. Like, I was that much of a Mormon kid, man. Like, I get that, like, my parents struggled with me in some ways and thought that, like, you know, I wasn't the greatest kid at times, but, like, I was honestly a pretty good kid. I, like, read my books. I had a big mouth. I was a little obstinate, but, like, you know, I wasn't out, like, fucking around doing crazy shit until, like, I was over the age of 18. Like, I wasn't, like, as a kid, I was so scared to do the wrong thing because I just didn't understand the world around me. And, you know, that's just a whole other topic for another day, honestly. But I remember, like, I'm knowing me, I probably said shit or fuck. I don't remember what I said for the first word, but I remember saying it and, like, covering my mouth and, like, waiting for something to happen. I don't know. And then I think I did it again. Like, I got, like, a little excited about it because I was just kind of, like... And then I, like, tried dropping it around some of my friends. They were like, whoa! Like, at school, you know? And then, I was like... At this point, this was my rebellion phase. Like, this is what I mean by what I was just saying. Like, my rebellion phase was doing that. Trying to make myself like coffee and tea because part of the Doctrine and Covenants of Mormonism is that you're not supposed to drink coffee or tea, and like the interpretations of that, by the way, get confusing because in the wording it's like unclear if it like caffeine's the problem or if it's like hot beverage, but like Mormons drink Diet Coke and hot cocoa. So, you know, it's like, again, it's one of those small things where the hardcore Mormons won't drink caffeinated coffee, or the hardcore Mormons won't drink like caffeinated sodas. My family wasn't that hardcore. Those were like the more staunch Mormons, the more unforgiving Mormons. Like, I was like definitely a very practicing, like heavily believing Mormon growing up, but and we were pretty staunch on the majority of the rules, but the smaller nitpicky things like that my mom was less serious about. Like, I was able to read Harry Potter, for example, and I was able to drink Diet Coke. So that's, when it comes to things like Mormonism, those distinctions really actually matter because the more fundamental, staunch you are, the closer you get to the Amish vibe, really, honestly. if I'm just gonna keep it 100 with that. What else? Oh, I remember the other thing. The other thing I would do to rebel is I would go to like Wednesday night activities as a young woman, which the young women's is 12 to 18 years old. And instead of going to the activity, I would arrive and then I like played hooky. Like, so this is a Wednesday night. This isn't even like church. This isn't even like actual church. But I would go out. So they had a picnic table out behind the church, by the honeysuckle bushes, and this like large grass area that a lot of kids would play on, like in this hill area. And I remember so specifically, there was this one leader that I had beef with. We had beef, she and I. I feel like she singled me out a lot, and I just did not fuck with her, and she didn't fuck with me. And so she would come out and she would do what Mormons do best, which is emotional manipulation. And I would just keep like trying to test boundaries and refuse and just be like you can't make me, like that whole kind of vibe. She wasn't my mom, you know what I mean? But eventually, as time went on, I became 18 and I became far more disillusioned by the church. And then that's when the story of how I lost my virginity happened, which is actually extremely tied to my leaving Mormonism story. So I'll keep it brief. So Dad, if you are watching this video, I'm gonna beg you to skip ahead. So here's a timestamp for that. But please skip this part. But as soon as I turned 18, I went on Yahoo Messenger, which growing up, I was really into Yahoo Messenger. I used that a lot to talk with people in school and stuff. But I always saw these message boards I wanted to go into, and I was such a goody two-shoes and like so scared of breaking those like more serious rules that I never made an email and lied about my age. So I never entered those chat rooms until a few months after my 18th birthday. And so they had all these different rooms, and most of them were easy to figure out because, like, 20s, 30s, 40s was by age. They had different ones for, like, different things, and all of them made sense in context except for one, which was BBW. Never heard of that before. And again, as I've said in the past, I was significantly bullied in childhood. I had a very rough childhood, and I had not received much positive attention ever in any facet, honestly. And I get into this chat room and I'm watching them talk, and finally I asked like what's a BBW, and someone explains it means big beautiful woman, right? At this stage I had no idea that it was considered like a term for an adult content category, but it was essentially a chat room for like fat people and people who like fat people. And my response is really sad, but it's what I said. I responded with, wait, people actually like fat people? And of course people thought I was a troll when I said that, but I actually meant that. I was about, if I wasn't already 500 pounds, I was about to be at that point. And I said that, and so people started getting mad, and I was like, wait, you don't understand. I'm fat and I'm 18. And then once they realized I wasn't a bot and that I was serious, my DMs started exploding. All of a sudden, I'm on like a Windows XP computer, and my dad would build us what we called like zombie computers. And the zombie computers were like, it was like the year 2010, and we had Windows 95, but we all had our own computers because he was able to source the parts, and he was just really good with computers. Like, that's what he's done his whole life. And so I had this older computer in my room, and I remember one time I went and logged on, and I put in my ASL to age myself here, 18F Georgia. And one time I did that, and I must have gotten at least 60 to 80 DMs in like the span of a few seconds, which is, again, in hindsight, horrible because I was 18. And when that happened, my computer crashed. Like, it completely just my computer couldn't handle it. And I just thought that was really funny. Well, I ended up talking to a guy who was way too old to be talking to me. He was 10 years older than me. And he was visiting in town. I lied to my parents. I came up with an alibi with one of my friends that my mom hated because she's the kind of friend who would make an alibi for me. And I did something really reckless and dangerous, and I met this person up somewhere, and we met up. Events transpired, and when all that ended, I remember the first time I looked at myself in the mirror afterwards, and I thought it was gonna be this big deal, but I had gotten something had gotten up my ass that I needed to know what it was like. I needed to just lose my virginity. I needed to just have this experience, and then I would know. For me, I feel like this was a big aspect of that rebellion. It was an ultimate rebellion for me because all this stuff was a lot smaller. So I went from 0 to 1,000 in 0.2 seconds, pretty much. I remember just how not different I felt. And I went to church the following Sunday. And I remember I probably arrived late. I sat in the back, so not in the main portion of the hall, but the part that extends into the gym with all the metal chairs in the back. And I was sitting there and listening to the bishop talk, listening to whoever talk. And I'm sitting there and I'm just getting antsier, and I just keep having this really loud, big thought in my head that I cannot shake. And it's just, I don't belong here anymore. I was done. I had been done. I had gone through a longer angry phase. At this point, I had already done my first partial hospitalization program. I had done a little bit of therapy, but not a big chunk of the work yet. I was just furious because I had been, over the past few years, slowly waking up and realizing that everything I had ever known and loved wasn't the truth, and that I had been basically told what to believe my whole life without any real chance of forming my own thought, and just expected to follow, and that pissed me off. I was mad, and I was mad for years to come too. And so that thought in my head just wouldn't go away. And finally, I just get to a point where I'm sick of this. So I didn't make a big scene, but while the bishop was talking, and it was I think I remember right, I was sitting in the either first or second row of metal chairs in the back portion. So, and the way it was all set up, I was kind of in the middle of the room near the entrances. So I stood up, and it was, unless you had a crying baby, it was kind of a big deal to get up and go and be moving and not being still and respectful especially during sacraments, during the main meeting. Because back then, I think they've changed the structure since, but back then, Mormon church on Sundays used to be 3 hours. The first part was I'm forgetting the terminology right now, to be honest with you, but the first part was the main worship part, and then the second part was, depending on your age, some kind of group wherein if you were the adults, it was the girls and the boys, or the young adults, the primary children would all be together, the adults would all be together, and then the third hour is basically the age groups and divided by the genders. So there's different words and terminology for all that, but I don't feel like getting into all that right now. So that was kind of the structure. So this was during the main part where everyone's together in the hall. And so I stood up and I turned to the side, and I walked out of the room with people looking at me and glaring at me for having gotten up. And I kind of did just suddenly stand up. It was a very it was a little bit of a startle, I'm sure, but I didn't make any noise, if that makes sense. It just kind of was a disruption in that way. And I walked out of the room, I walked out the front doors, and I didn't look back in the sense of the church. Now, when that happened and I left, a few different things happened. I started, I think, talking more on Facebook about things. I do kind of struggle to remember a lot of my like specific behavior, but what I do remember was just my increasing anger, because as time went on, people started playing their tactics as they do in the church of trying to get me to come back. So sometimes I would have people reach out and I'd get really excited because I thought they actually wanted to talk to me, just to talk to me. But almost every single time there was a motive of a church event, because one of the ways that they will try to get inactive members to come back is by having them come back to like the fun things, like the ice cream parties, the potlucks, the dances, the volunteer or like organized meets, like things like that, just to kind of get you back into the social sphere and then try to get you to come back to a Sunday worship. And they would literally like teach us to do that, like because it's encouraged for us to reach out to inactive, like they would, I remember one time in Young Women's, we had a list of all the inactive young women, and it was divided up against all of us to like talk, like who goes to school with who, how, you know, go to talk to them in the hallway, see what they're like that kind of stuff. And that also happens with the adults, and that did happen to me in my adulthood as well. I was assigned someone who for a long time did keep tabs on me and did talk to me, and for a while there I believed it was genuine, and eventually she stopped, and it was probably because she got reassigned, or you know, life happens. But it was just like, it's always hard to know, because I also remember during this time, like the things that really started to fuel my anger and kind of make me go, maybe this is a cult, was women who I treated like a second mom. Being in my early 20s, still living in my hometown, I remember I saw one of them at the grocery store, and I waved and I had a big smile on my face, and I was really excited to see them. And she just gave me this stone face and turned and walked away. And in the earlier years, I did have people like try to, I remember one time I got roped. I don't remember how they did it. I think they got me like through family members, and I don't remember the exact timing of it, but I remember what house I was living in, so I was probably about 21, 22. But they wrote me into some event, and they picked me up, and it was like so something that the young adults would do a lot, and or even just like the young single adults, because like the young single adults wards are a thing, because it's literally how they try to get like people to marry each other, because once you're married, then you would like go back to the regular family wards in your city or county or whatever. But they like roped us to go to like a big gathering at a Steak and Shake. So they did this a lot, and I remember it so specifically, like if there was ever events, like just I guess because it was cheap food, and they would have enough tables for all of us. And I went to that event, and all I remember about it was that it was super awkward, and I didn't have a good time, and I was mad that I went. And that was kind of it for a while. So that all happened, and I really just had to kind of process and release the pain and the grief of losing an entire ideology. And that's why I do reference being a Mormon when I talk about the fat acceptance and feederism spaces, and losing those, and getting to a place of just being like, oh, yeah, this is eerie in a lot of ways, not identical, but eerily similar in the ostracizing and other aspects that it's just, and it's far more parasocial of an experience, right? Obviously, with the way those communities are set up online versus the experience I had leaving Mormonism at 18. And so a lot of time passes, and in 2019, my ex and I broke up for the first time for 9 months. I moved back to Georgia, and I was really struggling to find work. I pretty much from 2019 until I moved to Florida, except for the brief period that my ex and I lived together for while I lived with him for the second time. Pretty much every time around then thereafter, I was very housing unstable. At one point, I was technically homeless for a day, but I had enough privilege and blessing in my life that the day that happened, someone had paid for a hotel room, so I never experienced what it was like to be homeless on the streets, but I was constantly at fear of losing housing. I lived in a camper for 7 months. Before all those moments, I was like trying to find a job, and when I finally got one, it paid pennies, and they expected us to dress like they were paying us double what they were actually paying us, and the environment was beyond toxic. And this was around the time that I started struggling with restriction in my diet, and then also restriction due to lack of access to food. I had some food insecurity as a child, but not super significant compared to what I experienced in 2019. And out of pride, I kind of starved there for a couple months. And some people might want to make cracks about that because of my weight. But it was really hard. It was to the point that I threw up and passed out at work, and they had to call an ambulance. And I had to try to play it off, and someone had to come pick me up because I didn't have the money for the ambulance to take me anywhere. And I knew the reason was because I hadn't been eating. And my mom had been begging me to go talk to the bishop of our home ward, because I was living back in my hometown for the first time in several years. And so I finally realized that I was like at a place where I either needed to like start going to a food pantry or do something. And so at my mom's behest, I made an appointment to see the bishop when I was 20. I think I turned 28 that year. So I probably was 27. I would believe. I think that's right. I could be slightly off, but if I remember correctly, my birthday cake that I got in 2019 said 28 on it. I hope I'm right. Anyway, I'm 32 now, but I booked an appointment. And now this specific bishop I did not know very well, but I knew a lot of people who were still in that ward. There were people in that ward that had been going to that ward years before we moved into town, and they watched me grow up, and they were still there. And where I lived, it just so happened to be the same zip code that I grew up in at the time. And I went to this meeting, and I was just wrung with confliction and guilt because I knew a few things. I knew that I did not believe in the gospel. I knew that I was not willing to convert for food assistance, or because the church has other means of assistance. The Mormon church has their own food storage production. It's called Desert Farms or Desert something. They make their own dish soaps, canned meats, canned fruit, jams, all the basics, flours, anything you can think of. They even provide basic toiletries like toilet paper, toothbrushes, and it's all made through the tithing that the Mormons pay into the church. And growing up, there was about 2 years where my family used it because we really needed to. And that was, and like those issues and things like that was one of the main reasons my mom was so heavily into extreme couponing, because it provided us with a lot when we had very little, right? And so I go to this meeting, and I knew in my heart that I was like, I'm not willing to compromise my integrity. I'm not, because I mentioned a long time, like, I had a friend, we ended up having a major falling out. She was just, overall, that was a very complicated relationship, and I don't even know if she ever genuinely valued me as a person, but again, that's a whole separate conversation. But growing up, her birth mother was horrible to her. There was times where I shopped through my food basement to give her food, because her mother was selling her food stamps, and I would give her tampons because, like, her mom stole her tampons. Like, it was like that level of bad. And I would be in the room while this mother would talk about all the ways that she was bullshitting the bishop and the church for rent assistance, utility assistance, food assistance, and like fully like engaging in like drugs and all these things, and while pretending to be a like practicing Mormon. And I was like, I'm not going to pretend to be a Mormon. If they tell me that like I have to come back to church to qualify for this assistance, then I'll figure something else out. But I went into that meeting with a guarded heart and not nearly as much anger as I once had, but I think there was still some there. And I sat down with the bishop, and we greeted each other. And so he had heard about me. He was like, yeah, I talked to so-and-so and so-and-so, and they had good things to say about you. So there was like a level of familiarity in this interaction. And even though he and I specifically didn't know each other. And so he just talked with me. He just asked me questions, and I was honest with him. And I said, look, like, I think I was working Sundays, and I definitely did use that as a part of it, where I was just like, I mean, even if I wanted to, I couldn't come to church because of my work schedule, but I don't want to. And I explained a lot of my hurt, and I explained my sticking points and the reasons why that I'm not comfortable with the church. And I told him flat out, like, I don't want to mislead you, and I don't want to compromise my integrity and misrepresent myself in some way or set expectations that I won't actually follow through on. And that's when he told me at some point that, you know, they do help others who are not members of the church. That is not a requirement to receive food assistance through the church and things like that. So that was in like August of 2019. And they got me into the food assistance. So I think it was like twice a month I would drive to the church. It was always like really like crack of dawn early. And they would give us shopping lists, and we would basically just place an order. And so I was able to get access to fresh fruits and vegetables. I was able to get bread, spaghetti. Spaghetti was a big safe meal for me. At this time, I was dealing with a lot of food aversions. You know, now that I think back on it, I wonder if I was a diabetic at that point. I don't know. A doctor? I didn't know her. Fuck. I have no way of knowing that for sure, but I'm thinking back to how I felt and how I would have random food aversions and I would struggle to eat. And the only other time I felt like that was right before I found out I was a diabetic. And it was around that time, one of the reasons that I fell into feederism the way that I did was because I was struggling to keep myself fed, and I would have periods of time where I wasn't as active with it because I didn't do the subscription pages or anything like that. I just word of mouth only, so the money was sporadic, and I was more part-time. I was never like truly 100% like committed full-time in adult spaces like that. I was impressed with him, and one of the things that I did end up doing at this time was I started meeting with the women missionaries in our ward. That's where I met Daisy, and Daisy was a unique bird. She was this gorgeous young girl, bright blonde golden hair, and she just had heart of gold, and she was unique to me because I think there were other missionaries. There was generally 4 that would come and talk to me, and the other 3, there was a couple I really liked. There was a couple that didn't see as often that I was just like, but Daisy stuck out to me so much because she really listened to me. And yeah, like the other girls would sit there and they would do their active listening, but they were like in their head cataloging like the steps of what they needed to do, what scriptures they needed to talk about. Like they were doing their mission. But Daisy seemed to understand me in a way that I would not expect from a Mormon missionary. And I think she and I may still be Facebook friends. We haven't talked in many years, but Daisy made me feel heard and respected in my pain and in my thoughts of the church, and she made me want to compromise more and read more. And while I never actually read the Book of Mormon in full like I thought I might, I did read bits of it, and I ultimately did get the confirmation that I made the right choice in leaving the church. And I had these discussions in a different place in life, and I'm glad that I did. So all of that happens, and I'm already involved with church support when January of 2020 happens. January 2020, I came into the new year with an extreme trauma. A few days later was the medical kidnapping story I've talked about in previous videos. I don't remember a lot of January and February of that year. I was so traumatized. I don't know how I survived. It was around that time that I believe, it was like February, March. I have the belief that I developed COVID earlier on. I lived in a part of Georgia that was close to one of the largest international airports in the country. And so, I had this level of sickness that I had never experienced before. It was completely and utterly, like, I don't know how I survived it. I had some friends that had it. Like, I've never been that sick in my life, in the sense that, like, I was struggling to breathe or even move. And in hindsight, it definitely seemed like COVID. Of course, that was before we really fully understood it or knew about it. And there was, like, a lot of us in that area that I do remember, like, experiencing those kinds of symptoms. I'll never know for certain if I've had COVID or not until I possibly, I guess, get some kind of antibody test, but I digress. But during that time, the church actually did step up. I think I was, like, on some kind of video chat with my parents, because, like, I was so mentally gone from the immense amount of trauma that I had experienced that I couldn't, like, really have normal conversations. Like, I wasn't coherent. I wasn't in the right frame of mind. And so the church did end up paying some of my back rent so I could have an extra month to figure out what I was going to do. And then when I ended up moving to Gainesville, which was like an hour or so away, I was able to transfer the food assistance to the ward over there. And I was able to continue on with the food assistance while I lived in the camper. Even though sometimes I didn't have enough money for the gas and the gas stove. those are aspects of the stuff that I experienced related to how I would use feederism to help me in some aspects that I haven't really gone into on my channel yet. I used to watch this guy on YouTube. Actually, I still watch him. But he used to do, like, during COVID, he made, like, takeout reviews specifically. Like, Uber Eats and all of that, and DoorDash. And I would watch it, because he would, like, basically DoorDash the entire fucking menu of most places. And I would, like, plan my orders for when I would make, like, feederism content or whatever. And I would plan the foods to be, like, easily reheatable, keep well, and I would make content and eat to a certain point. But I would always make sure that I had extra food, just so that way I would have food for the following days. And the church, I went back to, the only time I went back to church was, the only time I ever went back to church was basically directly after the trauma of 2020. I was so broken. There was a point where I was like, I think in the back of my head, like, I reconsidered for, like, a brief moment about my stance on Mormonism. Like, I was so lost. I just wanted something that felt familiar, that felt like home, that felt like safe. I needed something to make me feel safe. Thankfully, I ended up realizing that was not the right call for me. But I did go back and, like, I saw a lot of people, and it was an odd experience. Outside of that moment, the only other times I had gone back to church was when my sister had her baby blessings for her 3 children. Other than that, though, and I think I only went one Sunday, maybe 2. I think it was just the one. So I was very conflicted. And I was very lost. So, at that point, I think in totality, I was on the food assistance for about a year and a half. And the original plan was for me to, I was going to switch it to Omaha for 1 month because I was going to be living with my boyfriend. I wanted to just get a little bit set up there because I had, at that point, like, I hadn't really been able to work. When I was living in the camper, I had gotten a job with a company doing call center work. So my family friend fed an Ethernet cable through their window, their front window, like in their house, in through basically a hole in the bottom of the camper that I lived in, up from under my bed, and I would plug my laptop into that, and I would plug my headset into the laptop, and I would basically take, like, these random call center calls, like, of, like, several different companies. Like, one was QVC, the other was some kind of, like, tactical gear. There was, I think I got trained in multiples, but, like, I think, like, there were some that were just, like, random evangelical Christian lines that were selling shit. Like, it was just, like, it was one of the weirdest jobs I've ever had. And it was one of those things where, like, the hours varied depending on business need. And I mean, I would be lucky if I made $200 in 2 weeks. And then eventually they just stopped handing me hours. They didn't fire me. I didn't quit. They just stopped putting me on the schedule. And I was just like, okay. So, and that was so hard for me to do. But if I wasn't doing that, then I couldn't even keep up with, like, the bare minimum cost of living in a camper that I had to clean every single day, or like mold would grow because it was a camper in a really wet, woodsy area of Georgia. And I was really depressed and horrifically traumatized. So I didn't always get to clean it every day, but sometimes I just like couldn't deal with it. I had to literally like wipe down the walls with towels. One time, even with all my upkeep, I didn't realize it, like mold grew in my pillows. That was horrible. And you know, it's just, I am sharing a lot of personal details, stuff that I haven't really fully gone into on my channel before, because it was through those experiences in that time in my life that this church that I once had so much anger towards did support me. And I share it because I have a lot of problems with the church, with Mormonism as an entity. But as a people, I think that there are a lot of really kind and compassionate Mormons. I believe there are a lot of people that, at their core, are really good people. And they just want to do good by their family, be good for their own peace of mind. And while I may not agree on a lot of like the ideology aspects, there are a lot of people that I personally know and respect that are Mormon. And there are also a lot that I know are just as hypocritical and crappy as other hypocritical Christians can be. Evangelical or Catholic or any religion, honestly. Because when I tried to switch to the Omaha location, I had actually had issues with this specific bishop in the ward that I would have been in Omaha. Because he was shady. I did not like him. I had a run in with him when I had looked into if you're like registered as a Mormon, you can potentially basically take classes and get either discounted rates or ways of getting a college degree with like help through the church. But the curriculum does require like religion classes. And ultimately, like, once I looked into it, I just realized it wasn't for me. Because, again, it was one of those things of, like, I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to compromise my morals and sell my integrity just for the chance to get some kind of benefit. Which, at that point, would have been the, like, discounted or free schooling. Or I forget the exact thing that it's called. I just forget. But I had to like speak with him again. And so, because when all of that happened, by the way, like when I went to go talk with him the very first time, this was back in like 2017 when I lived in Omaha the first time. I realized in hindsight, like manipulated me into giving him my contact information when I didn't want to. I was worried about pissing off my boyfriend because I knew he'd be pissed if the Mormon missionaries started showing up at our apartment. And that's exactly what happened. Even though I told them that I didn't want that, even though I told him I didn't want to give my information, I was manipulated into it, just to put it bluntly. And I left that experience with a really sour taste in my mouth. And so when I came back and all of that, he told me under no circumstance that if I was going to get any kind of assistance, I think his exact words were, his hands were tied and he wouldn't be able to help unless I was showing some sort of effort of being a part of the church. Very, very unlike the experience I had with the bishop in my home ward. And at that point, I was like, I'll figure something else out. And I did. I wanted to do that because I wanted to be less of a financial burden on my boyfriend at the time. I wanted to just get kind of set up, and then I wanted to then at that point discontinue the assistance, because they had helped me for so long and kept me afloat. I was trying to figure out what I was gonna do, and so I was just like, and I had moved with some things, like some of the stuff that I packed was like dish soap I'd already had, things like that. So, because I remember having a Desert Farms like dish soap at that apartment, but they never actually helped me in Omaha, and I think that really just goes to show in regards to intent and what the motivation is for those types of things, because the first person that I worked with was non-conditional and was coming from a place of acts of service, which I did a lot of growing up, by the way. My mom and I would run and do a lot of Meals on Wheels together, passing out the meals to the elderly who needed company and meals. I remember having a lot of conversations with them, and I remember the smell of the van and complaining about the smell in the van of the food. But they loved it. I remember I'd be like, prune juice, what people drink that, and going to, I remember we would it's painting projects, we would go clean up parks. I didn't go to New Orleans when Katrina happened, but a lot of the young men and a lot of people in the ward packed up, I think at least someone packed up a literal semi of supplies, and a bunch of people went down and helped in the efforts and Katrina, and things like that are a positive light when it comes to Mormonism, and there are positive values, but there are a lot of negatives, and there was a lot within the church that fed ideology within myself and reinforced narratives and traumas of myself. I believe that I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, that I was inherently bad, and I believe what I used to think was of the devil. I didn't verbalize these things. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my therapists. When I was 14, I had a conversation with a different bishop, and this was routine, and I hope they don't do this anymore, but we would be put in a room by ourselves with our bishop with a book in front of him, and he would ask us questions about our chastity, very detailed questions about if we had been touched in this way or had done this act or things like that. And I remember he asked me a question, and it had been a little bit before then that I had realized what had happened to me when I was 6 years old. And the way the question was asked, I wasn't sure if I had lied or not, because I did not tell this man anything to indicate that I had experienced that kind of abuse. And I was too scared to, and I was scared that it would indicate that I was impure, that I had done something wrong when I was a victim. At 6 years old, I was a victim. I no longer see myself as a victim in my current life, but I was a victim then. And I did not fully understand how to categorize or interpret that, and it made me feel so awful and small and dirty. So I don't regret leaving the church. In fact, I think it's one of the best things I've ever done. I had to really find my own happiness after that. I had to really make space for myself in this world to understand that there is beauty in celebrating a secular life, and that moral superiority that can come from being a Mormon, thinking that the way you behave on earth is going to grant you this celestial blessing and access in a realm that may or may not exist. I'm thankful to not need to sacrifice who I am anymore, to feel like I'm fitting that. I no longer need to make myself smaller in terms of my personality, tenacity, vivaciousness. I no longer feel the need to shove my rectangle self into a triangle, you know? That was a lot. I guess there was maybe a little bit of trauma dumping in this, but I tried to keep the significant stuff a little fluffier in the language. But I did share more details with you guys than I ever have before. Because I wanted to share those to give context of the gravity of. I wanted to give context in the gravity of the dichotomy I feel for the church. This gratitude for the roles that it played when I didn't even know how to survive in both my childhood and adulthood, and the roles that it played in tearing down my self-esteem, in destroying my trust in the world around me, in feeling deceived and lied to, in feeling like I was forced into a situation at birth that I had to overcome, that I would have been far better without. So when you take those, it's one of those things where two truths exist at the same time. And I kind of leave this conversation still conflicted. Because at the end of the day, do I believe that Mormonism is a cult? Yeah. Maybe a diet cult. That's what I used to call it, a diet cult. But yeah. That's not really the point of this video. This video is about my experience of being a Mormon. But yeah. I do. And I used to be so afraid to talk about that and say that because I do have family that is Mormon. I do have people in my life that are Mormon. And there are some who are able to understand that people can have different viewpoints and still respect each other. And there are some that are so deep, they can't. There's probably more stories for sure. But I do feel like I kind of hit the main points there. Yeah, maybe I'll share more stories in the future about, because I went to EFY as a kid. I don't even remember what that stands for anymore. It's basically like a co-ed, I would do girls' camp. It's kind of like that, but they're hosted at colleges. And, it's a co-ed event, but, you stay separately. I don't know. They're hard to... EFY is hard to explain. I don't even know how to explain it. But I did a lot of different events, and there's probably more stories about, how specifically my social situation was in the church and things like that. But maybe I'll share those off and on here and there. But I do feel like I've kind of covered the main basis here. So I guess thank you for watching. If you're watching all the way to the end, I'm impressed. I've been yakking so much, my jaw hurts. That is my experience as being a Mormon, and going from being a true blue Mormon to at one point almost atheist. I was agnostic for a long time. Now I have very personal spiritual beliefs that I don't get into a ton online. Just know that I am pretty anti-organized religion as a concept, as a whole. But I respect people's religious beliefs and differences, and I expect the same. is kind of my framework. I used to be a lot more inflammatory and angry around the topic of religion. I have grown out of that. But where that kind of fades a little is when people use religion as a way of hurting and oppressing other people. And it happens far too often. I do believe in a power greater than myself, and I believe I'm too human to know what that power is. So I don't really tend to personify it with a God, and especially a Christian God. And that's kind of how I stand in that belief. And I believe that there is something far greater than what we could know or understand as humans. And I respect it immensely. And I believe in the power of prayer just as I believe in the power of meditation. And again, I just don't believe in prayer through the lens of Christians, you know? Like, it just looks a little bit different. But when people want to pray for me, I take that as a sign of wanting to express love, care, and gratitude. And so I don't take that as a negative. I don't take that as a bad thing. I take that as someone taking a reverent moment to reflect upon me and send me the gift of their love and care with intention. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, whether that's prayer or otherwise. The only kind of prayer I don't love is the condescending kind of like, I'll pray for you, so that way you can like figure your shit out and get right with God. That stuff I don't fuck with. But like real prayer where it's like someone just wanting the best for you and wanting you to have blessings they feel you deserve, that kind of thing, I'm all over that, because I feel like that's why I love to say like I'll send good vibes, I'll send love and light. That's kind of how I view it, right? But anyway, yeah, that was a lot. It's crazy how many more stories I kind of like, they just kind of feel sporadic. They're just kind of coming to me randomly. Like the time that I was in Young Women's, I was probably about 14. I think I was going through some shit, and this really like kind of more popular-esque girl invited me to go shopping. And it was like her and like 4 or 5 other girls. They were all like, they were not my friends. And by the end of it, I felt really weird. So I'm just going to kind of explain what happened. I think basically somebody came together somewhere, and each of these girls individually handed me like $20. And they took me to go shopping. And so like all these like skinny girls wearing Aeropostale and Hollister and all of that took me to like, I don't know, what was it? Lane Bryant or maybe Fashion, but like someplace that actually had clothes that could fit me. And if I remember right, wherever they took me, I think the clothes may have not actually fit, so it probably wasn't Fashion Bug. So if I remember right, I don't even think I actually got to buy buy anything I actually really liked or fit right. And it was just like, even with my lacking ability to read social situations, especially as a kid, like I could tell that like these kids had been like kind of forced into doing this. And it felt like by the end of it, I realized that this whole thing had been kind of organized out of pity. And it didn't feel good. Because like I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of nice clothes. I don't even think they fully told my mom what they were doing, if I remember right. I think like they got permission or whatever. It was like trusted people from church, so she didn't question it too much. But I just remember by the end of it feeling really weird about it. And like I mentioned how like when I went to Young Women's Camp my first year, I had all these crazy horrible things happen. One of them was I almost drowned in the lake. And they didn't even call medical care for me, which I think, looking back, like, that's crazy. Like, I had ingested so much water and was, like, coughing up water and, like, almost blacked out, because essentially these two girls wanted to help me get over my fear of going underwater. Ironic. And so what they did is they, like, had me kind of, like, coached me and went down with me. The first few times, like, it went really well. They were just a little bit underwater, like, just your head, a few times getting used to it, and then they started taking me down deeper and deeper, and eventually they went and took me all the way 9 feet down to the bottom of the lake. When my foot touched the bottom of the lake, was when I started inhaling water. So the entire way up, of going back up, I was, like, getting water directly into my lungs. I get back out, and I'm, like, hyperventilating and, like, coughing and, like, coughing up all this water. And I, like, tell them I'm fine, because I, like, don't want to be a burden and a problem, because, hi, welcome to me. And then I never got follow-up medical care about that. I mean, and I've had a horrible lungs probably since before that, but that did not help. That's for sure. The wetness of my cough kind of has always been there since that time. Yeah. But it's just like, yeah, there's a lot of stories like that. Just when I look back in hindsight, I'm like, I've got questions. Like, what happened here? But I think in a lot of ways, the order and structure of being a Mormon, while it had its issues and downsides, in conjunction with my trauma, I think in conjunction with the chaos and trauma of my life, it did provide a sense of order. Whether, like, or not that's an overcorrection is definitely up for debate. I think it's an overcorrection, right? But at the same time, there are parts of me and my character and who I am that was founded because there were certain things preached in my childhood that I fully believed and took advice on. There are parts of me, like my cooking, my ingenuity, my resourcefulness. I think a lot of that comes from my mama, but it also comes from the positive reinforcement of aspects within the church. I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you guys so much for watching. This video might honestly be over an hour. Who knows? I've been talking for so long. This has been something that a lot of people have wanted me to discuss on. Feel free to leave comments below. If you have questions, maybe I can make a follow-up video, answer some specific questions, and maybe go more into the ideology side of things and explain, because honestly, this video is not the video for you if you're looking to know, like, what Mormonism's all about and, like, the magic underwear, because I mean, I tapped out before the magic underwear became a part of my life. And for the longest time, I mean, I do think that the magic underwear is just definitely a little disrespectful, but at the same time, learning what I know now about, like, what actually happens during temple ceremonies and stuff that I had no idea of as a kid is, like, kind of crazy. And yeah, so there's a lot of layers with all of that. But the timing of when I left just means that there's a lot of aspects of the church that I didn't fully dive into or fully get to understand because of how early I left. Because I operated more as a child in the church instead of being an adult in the church. And I do think that distinction is different. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, wherever you are. Wonderful evening, and stay true. Bye.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops.